By the time he stepped into the bank, someone was already seconds from being humiliated, and he was seconds from making sure that didn't happen. No one in that building knew what was about to unfold. But they'd remember it for the rest of their lives. Because this wasn't just another Thursday. It was the moment the quiet man with the haunted eyes changed everything. Miles Turner adjusted his sun-faded baseball cap as he walked into Crescent City Bank on a humid Thursday morning. At 29, the former paratrooper moved with a sense of controlled precision, back straight, gaze sharp, steps deliberate. 6 months had passed since his honorable discharge, and though the battlefield was behind him, the discipline still clung to every inch of him. Civilian life had taken shape slowly, and he'd recently started working as an electrician. Solving real problems with wire and grit gave him a sense of peace he didn't often talk about. Raised by a single mother after losing his father, an army captain who never made it back from his final mission in Syria when Miles was just a boy, he'd grown up watching her fight battles no one acknowledged. Bureaucracies, disrespect, condescension, he remembered it all. It molded him, carved something fierce and unbending into his soul. Rent was due tomorrow, and Miles still preferred paying in person. A lifetime of watching systems fail the vulnerable had killed his faith in anything that required a stamp. Joining the short line near the teller windows, he caught sight of an elderly woman at the customer desk. She looked like she'd stepped out of another decade. Neatly tied silver hair, soft blue cardigan despite the spring heat, and trembling hands pushing a crisp envelope across the counter. "Ma'am, I've told you multiple times," the young woman behind the desk said, her voice sharp, tone clipped. "There's no mistake. The fee was applied correctly. That's per our policy." "But this notice says otherwise," the old woman replied, voice thin but steady. "My husband's military pension shouldn't be subject to these deductions. It's protected under—" "Our system doesn't list any such status," the bank worker snapped, not even looking at the paper. "Sorry, there's nothing more I can do." Her posture wilted slightly, but she didn't sit, didn't beg. Dignity hung around her like armor, thin and cracked but unbroken. Miles saw the same posture he remembered from his mother when she'd been dismissed by offices, denied by forms, and still stood her ground. "Could I speak with a supervisor, please?" the woman asked politely. A guy behind Miles let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "Seriously? People still don't know how lines work?" he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few heads turned, then quickly turned back. No one wanted to get involved. The bank rep's expression iced over. "The manager is unavailable. Like I said, there's nothing to discuss. You can come back when you've got the right documentation." "Lady," the impatient man barked from behind, "take your issue somewhere else. Some of us have actual jobs to get to." Miles felt the burn creep up his spine. That same helpless heat he'd felt as a child, watching his mom get brushed aside by people with too much power and not enough compassion. He didn't hesitate. He stepped out of line and walked to the customer desk. With a calm hand, he gently touched the elderly woman's shoulder. The bank worker blinked, startled. "She deserves your time. And your respect," Miles said softly, voice low but resonant still, carrying that quiet command of a man who'd been in combat. "I'll wait while you review her concern properly." The employee frowned. "Sir, this doesn't involve you. Please return to the line." Miles didn't move. "It involves all of us. Every single one standing here deserves to be treated like a human being." The room shifted. Eyes watched. Some with curiosity, some with irritation. Most just unsure how to react when rules met righteousness. "Is there a problem here?" A security guard approached, tension coiling in his steps. Miles gave a faint smile. "Not at all. I'm just here to make sure this woman gets the attention she's owed." The woman turned to him, her eyes moist but strong. "Thank you, young man, but I don't want you in trouble on my account." Her voice had the soft lilt of Tennessee hills, but carried the steely echo of a woman who'd endured her own wars. "No trouble at all, ma'am," Miles said, unmoving. She extended her hand. "I'm Evelyn Ross, widow of Colonel Franklin Ross, 82nd Airborne. He gave his life in Fallujah 15 years back." Miles shook her hand firmly. Her grip, despite age, had strength. Miles Turner, former 173rd Airborne. Pleased to meet you, ma'am. Her face lit up with a trace of recognition. Frank used to train with your unit. Said they never backed down. She turned back to the bank worker, who was now trying to feign professionalism. This letter is from the Department of Veterans Affairs, Evelyn said. It clearly confirms that my account is exempt from fees. This same issue happened 3 months ago, and your manager fixed it then. Miles glanced at the paper official VA letterhead, direct language. He'd seen plenty of those himself during his transition. She's got everything she needs right here, he said, placing the letter down. Could you double-check your records? The bank worker gave a heavy sigh. Our system is the final source. That paper doesn't override it. If anything's changed, she needs to go back to the Venadas. By now, every conversation in the bank had stopped. Phones lowered, eyes focused. A man in a sharp suit stepped out of an office, brow furrowed. Jennifer, what's the holdup? He asked the teller. Before she could reply, the same impatient guy from earlier chimed in. This guy's just playing white knight for Granny here. Some of us got lives, man. A few others nodded, checking phones and watches, faking inconvenience with dramatic sighs. The suited man turned to Miles. Sir, I understand your concern, but we follow procedures here. Mrs. Ross can set an appointment to discuss this further. Miles's jaw clenched, his breath slow and deliberate. Miles kept his voice steady, measured with a respect that still held steel underneath. Sir, this isn't about red tape or policy manuals. It's about doing right by someone who's already given more to this country than most ever will. The man in the crisp suit, clearly the branch manager, tilted his head, eyes narrowing, as though weighing his next words like chess pieces. Are you implying we don't respect veterans and their families? He asked sharply. Because I assure you, many of our clients have served. We're proud of them. I'm saying, Miles replied evenly, that Mrs. Ross deserves more than being dismissed like an inconvenience. Evelyn reached into her purse slowly and discreetly, slipped a small card into Miles' palm. Curious, he glanced down. It bore the insignia of Charlie Company, 1st Division and Elite, rarely spoken of unit, that carried heavy reputation in the military community. It's all right, dear, Evelyn murmured quietly, her voice barely a breath. I'm used to this little dance. Something about her composed acceptance stung deeper than any insult. This wasn't about fees or procedures anymore. This was about a nation that cheered its soldiers on the tarmac, then turned its back once their usefulness ended. The hollow praise, the shallow gratitude, and the quiet bearing of the burdens those left behind still carried. The security guard edged closer now. Sir, if you're not here to conduct business, I'm going to need you to leave. From the line, a woman's voice chimed in, laced with contempt. He's just faking it. Bet he never even wore a uniform. Yeah, added another voice. Who made him the bank's moral compass? Miles felt the weight of it, the disconnection, the detachment. It was the same lonely fog that had surrounded him since his return home. People said, "Thank you for your service," with one breath and turned indifferent the next. They didn't understand. Most didn't want to. For a brief moment, Miles almost considered walking away. He had bills, too. Responsibilities. This wasn't his fight. But Evelyn must have sensed the conflict behind his silence. You've done enough, son, she said gently. I've fought worse battles alone. But the part of Miles that had survived 14 chaotic months in Kandahar, that stubborn inner wall built on sweat, loss, and loyalty, refused to back down. I'm not leaving, he said softly to Evelyn, then raised his eyes to meet the manager's. I'm a customer here. I have every right to be in this building, and I choose to stand with Mrs. Ross until her situation is handled properly. The manager's jaw twitched. Then I'll have to ask both of you to exit the premises. We cannot allow disruptions to affect our other clients. Miles didn't blink. Calling the police over a military widow's pension issue? He asked coolly. That'll make a nice headline. Crescent City Bank removes veteran's widow over $14 fee. Sounds like something the press would love. A long pause stretched between them. The tension pulsed like static through the room. The manager and the teller exchanged nervous glances. Finally, the teller Jennifer let out a tired breath and slid Evelyn's papers back across the desk without a glance. "We'll need to look into this more thoroughly," she said, voice clipped. "Mrs. Ross, you'll receive a call once we've reviewed everything. You can go home for now." Evelyn bowed her head slightly, not defeated, just weary, from yet another battle she hadn't asked for. As she gathered her documents, she reached out and gave Miles's hand a soft but firm squeeze. "Thank you," she whispered. "You reminded me today that not everyone forgets." Miles stood motionless, a storm behind his steady expression. He had stood up. Yes, but what had changed? The rules, the system, the sterile wall of indifference, they remained untouched. As they turned toward the exit, Evelyn's voice reached his ears, soft but steady. "Frank always told me that one person standing for what's right is worth a battalion of those standing for nothing." The security guard flanked them now, a quiet shadow making sure they knew this was an escort, not an exit on their own terms. Miles walked beside Evelyn, his hand gently resting at her elbow in silent support. He could feel eyes on them, some warm, most merely curious. Just another odd interruption in their otherwise convenient day. If you've ever watched someone innocent get treated unfairly, type "unfair" in the comments. As they neared the polished glass doors, Miles felt a hard knot twist in his gut. Part of him screamed to push further, to make noise, to demand someone listen. But another part of him knew this system was designed to mute voices like his. What difference could one former paratrooper really make against corporate inertia? As if reading his mind, Evelyn looked up. "You did more than most would," she said gently. "Just being beside sometimes, that's enough." The security guard reached for the door, face unreadable, but every movement making it clear they were no longer welcome. "I'm sorry I couldn't do more," Miles murmured, the regret heavy in his throat. Evelyn gave a small smile and patted his arm. "You were here. That's more than enough." But then, just before they could step through, the bank's double doors burst open from the outside. Miles instinctively shifted forward, putting himself in front of Evelyn, his hand lightly brushing the small of her back, protective instinct firing like muscle memory. A tall, broad-shouldered man entered, mid-60s, dressed in the formal blue of a U.S. Army General Service uniform. Ribbons gleamed across his chest. Polished stars sat on each shoulder. 4 other officers flanked him, each in matching attire. Their entrance was quiet but thunderous in impact. The entire bank fell into hushed awe. The security guard froze, still holding the door, suddenly unsure whether to salute or step aside. Miles straightened instantly, his spine reacting before his mind caught up. You didn't need introductions for rank like that, it carried its own gravity. The general's sharp eyes swept across the bank before landing on Evelyn and Miles. "Mrs. Ross," he said, his voice calm but commanding. "We've been looking for you." Evelyn's eyes widened in disbelief. "General Camden?" she gasped, her voice tinged with shock. General Elijah Camden, head of the Southeastern Military Command, strode forward and did something that drew a ripple of gasps across the lobby. He embraced Evelyn Ross, gently, like she was family. "My apologies for the delay, Evelyn," he said. "The traffic was heavier than we anticipated." He stepped back, looking her over with genuine concern. "Is everything all right here?" Before Evelyn could respond, the manager rushed forward, his face switching gears from annoyed to mortified in real time. "General Camden, what an unexpected honor. I'm Thomas Wilson, branch manager here at Crescent City Bank. Please, how can we assist you today?" The general's expression cooled noticeably, his gaze sizing Wilson up with quiet judgment. "I'm here to escort Mrs. Evelyn Ross to the memorial dedication in her husband's honor," Camden replied. "But it appears there's something that needs addressing first." Evelyn gave a small, composed nod. "Just a bit of confusion regarding Frank's pension account. Nothing new. This young man," she added, gesturing toward Miles, "was kind enough to stand with me." General Camden turned fully to face Miles, who stood upright, not at rigid attention, but with the composed calm of one soldier recognizing another. "And you are?" the general asked, voice level but firm. "Miles Turner, sir, former specialist, 173rd Airborne." Miles replied. Camden extended a hand. Miles grasped it firmly. The kind of handshake that didn't need words to carry weight. "Thank you for standing up for Mrs. Ross," the general said with deliberate gravity. "She means a great deal to our extended military family." Then, without softening his tone, he turned back to the increasingly pale bank manager. "You may not realize exactly who Evelyn Ross is," Camden said. "Let me help you with that." The entire bank seemed to hold its breath. Clients stood frozen, and employees stilled behind counters and desks. "Evelyn Ross is not just any military widow," Camden began. "For nearly 4 decades, she worked beside her husband Colonel Franklin Ross station to station, base to base, across the country. While Colonel Ross taught strategy and survival to some of our finest soldiers, Mrs. Ross was counseling the recruits, organizing family support initiatives, building morale, and laying the foundation for programs still in use today." One of the officers behind Camden stepped forward and handed him a leather-bound folder. "When Colonel Ross was killed in action sacrificing his life to shield 3 wounded soldiers during an ambush in Fallujah, Mrs. Ross didn't retreat into quiet grief. She continued serving. Over 15,000 volunteer hours at VA hospitals. Advocacy work. She's helped more soldiers off the battlefield than most commanders." He opened the folder, extracted a sheet, and held it up. "The fee exemption she mentioned? It was signed and authorized by the Secretary of Defense himself, in acknowledgement of her continued service to this nation." The manager's complexion went gray. Behind him, Jennifer, the flustered teller, looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. "And furthermore," Camden added, his voice like a scalpel, "the account in question is from a special pension fund designated for families of Medal of Honor recipients. Colonel Ross received that recognition posthumously for his final act of valor." A low gasp spread like a wave through the bank. Even Miles felt something shift in his chest, a deeper, sharper sense of awe. He hadn't just defended a widow, he'd defended a legend. Camden's gaze returned to the staff. "Mrs. Ross never once invoked her husband's name for privilege. She's never demanded recognition. So it's all the more disappointing that when she finally requests what she is legally and morally entitled to, she's told to take a number." The manager began to sweat visibly. "General, sir, two believe there's been a serious misunderstanding here. We'll fix this right away." "You'll do more than fix it," Camden said with crisp finality. "I'm ordering a full audit of how this institution manages accounts tied to veterans and their families. One of my staff will remain on-site today to begin the process." His voice softened slightly as he turned back to Evelyn. "The memorial ceremony begins in an hour. We've all gathered to honor you and Colonel Ross. They're waiting." Evelyn's expression warmed, her voice gentle. "I wouldn't miss it, John. Not for the world." Camden looked to Miles next. "Mr. Turner, would you join us? The ceremony celebrates service both by those in uniform and those who carry the weight long after. From what I've seen today, you understand that better than most." Miles paused, caught off guard. Then he gave a quiet, resolute nod. "It would be my honor, sir." As the group made their way toward the doors, Camden slowed near the same young man who had earlier mocked Evelyn and Miles. Without looking at him directly, the general spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Sometimes, the most critical battles aren't fought with weapons, or in war zones. They're fought in banks, in schools, on sidewalks. And the greatest form of courage," he said, "is often just standing by someone when no one else will." Outside, a dark military SUV waited at the curb. As Evelyn was helped in, she reached once more for Miles' hand. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "Not many people do anymore, especially not widows." Miles stood tall, emotion tight in his chest. "It was an honor, ma'am." Camden laid a hand on Miles's shoulder with the quiet power of someone bestowing more than thanks. "You know, son, we have a saying in the service. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stand your ground. Today, you reminded all of us that courage doesn't retire when the uniform comes off." As the motorcade prepared to depart, Miles glanced back toward the bank. Behind the glass, customers and staff were still watching, some with guilt, others with new respect. Camden spoke again, his tone quieter now, but no less resolute. "Sometimes, one person standing firm can change an entire system. If you believe that even a single act of defiance can shift the tide, type yes below. What happened that Thursday morning at Crescent City Bank sparked a ripple effect no one could have foreseen. By the following week, the bank issued a formal public apology to Evelyn Ross. But more than that, they launched a comprehensive staff training initiative specifically focused on supporting military families and recognizing veteran accounts. Jennifer, the teller who had initially dismissed Evelyn, reached out to Miles herself. Her voice, over the phone, was soft but sincere. "I didn't realize how cold I'd become," she admitted. "How easy it was to see numbers, not people. But now I see faces. I see stories." For Miles, the ceremony that followed opened more than just his heart. It opened a new door entirely. General Camden, impressed by the former soldier's quiet stand for what was right, extended an offer, a civilian advisory role that would allow Miles to act as a liaison between veterans and the world they returned to. "You walk between two worlds," the general had told him, "and you have the guts to speak up when it matters." Though it didn't require his electrician's toolkit, the work was more fulfilling than anything Miles had imagined. He helped design real solutions programs for helping veterans transition, find work, deal with the chaos of red tape, or just feel seen again. At the military headquarters, a framed photo appeared in the main hallway. It showed Miles standing beside Evelyn Ross, at the memorial, her hand resting on his arm, his expression steady and proud. Beneath it, a simple inscription. Sometimes standing still means standing tallest. The image quickly became a symbol of renewed commitment to honoring not just service members, but the people and families who stood behind them. Evelyn, now a frequent visitor to Miles's office, often brought cookies and stories. Their bond grew deeper. After Miles's own mother had passed 2 years earlier, Evelyn filled that quiet space with grace. Through Evelyn, Miles Turner began forging bonds with veterans from previous generations, men and women who had worn the uniform long before him. Through coffee meetups, volunteer work, and late-night phone calls, he built an unexpected but vital intergenerational support circle, each sharing stories, each finding healing in the space between. Thomas Wilson, the bank manager whose demeanor had flipped the moment General Camden walked through the door, found his life quietly altered by the entire encounter. 6 months later, he reached out to Miles with a surprising offer to volunteer his financial expertise for struggling veterans. That day, he confessed, something shifted. I realized I'd been using policies as a shield when I should have been using my position to protect people. But perhaps the most striking transformation occurred inside the bank itself. Jennifer, once a dismissive and impatient clerk, shared her reflections during a new staff training session. "I used to believe speed and accuracy were everything," she admitted. "But I learned something, that dazzlance can be just as harmful as cruelty. I didn't need to shout or make a scene. I just needed to not look away." Her words landed hard in the training room. Around her sat colleagues who had stood silently as Evelyn Ross was denied her rights. That silence, too, had left a mark on now. They felt the weight of it. Slowly, the atmosphere at Crescent City Bank evolved. It shifted from transaction-focused indifference to a place that acknowledged the stories behind every account number. For Miles, the experience at the bank crystallized a deeper understanding, a truth he'd only half realized until then, that bravery doesn't always roar. That in civilian life, courage wears quieter clothes but is no less vital. In combat, he explained to a room of newly discharged veterans, you stand shoulder to shoulder because your life depends on it. But out here, in the world beyond the wire, you have to choose to stand beside someone. And that choice, when it would be easier to walk away, that's what protects the values we fought for. A small plaque appeared on Miles' desk at the Community Outreach Center, engraved and gifted by Evelyn Ross on the 1-year anniversary of their meeting. It bore only 3 lines. Sometimes, one person standing for what's right is worth 1,000 standing for nothing at all. Thank you for standing with me. As I reflect on Miles and Evelyn's story, one question keeps echoing louder than the rest. How many times in our lives do we step forward when no one else does? It's easy to think of courage in cinematic terms, rushing into fire, pulling someone from a wreck, making headlines. But perhaps the purest form of courage is also the most unnoticed. Standing beside someone when they've been ignored, disrespected, or written off. Miles Turner didn't launch into a passionate speech that day. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stepped out of line and said, "This isn't right, and I won't be part of it." And that made all the difference. How many Evelyn Rosses are moving through our daily lives, invisible until someone truly sees them? The veteran at the pharmacy struggling to understand a copay notice. The immigrant family lost in a bureaucratic maze. The disabled neighbor unable to access a local shop. Each time, we're offered the same choice Miles faced: to stay out of it or to step in. Our culture trains us to avoid other people's problems. We're told to stay in our lane, keep our heads down, avoid conflict. We idolize heroes in capes, uniforms, and combat gear but forget the ones walking among us in plain clothes. Miles' story reminds us. Sometimes heroism is whisper, quiet. Sometimes it's just a hand on someone's shoulder and the words, "You're not alone." So think about it. Who's done that for you? Who stood beside you when no one else would? A coach who didn't give up on you? A coworker who called out injustice? A stranger who stepped in when you were being treated unfairly? Take a moment. Remember them. Better yet, reach out. Say thank you. And then ask yourself the harder question. When was the last time you were that person for someone else? The world needs Herosius, but not the kind you see in the movies. The world needs ordinary people who refuse to remain indifferent. Because moral courage? It's the most exhausting kind. It doesn't come with parades. It doesn't get applause. It happens in banks, on buses, in schoolyards and waiting rooms. And it happens when people choose to be present instead of silent. The next time you see someone being dismissed, talked down to, or left behind, don't look away. Remember Miles Turner. Remember Evelyn Ross. Remember that sometimes the strongest stance isn't shouting or swinging. It's staying. The most powerful part of this story wasn't General Camden's arrival or the sharp silence that fell over the bank. It was the moment Miles made a quiet decision with no guarantee of reward, no audience watching. He simply stepped out of line and stood beside a woman society had tried to erase. And in that moment, he showed us all what real character looks like. As Evelyn once told him, with that steady glint of pride in her eyes, "My Frank always said, one person standing for what's right is worth a regiment of those standing for nothing." So today, let's be that one. Let's be the ones who see, who stand, who refuse to disappear when someone needs us most. Nobody has time for a poor old lady. The mocking laughter echoed across the lobby. A young man clenched his fists and stepped forward. 30 seconds later, heavy footsteps rang out. A four-star general, dressed in full ceremonial uniform, entered. And what happened next made an entire banking system bow its head and apologize.